Alrighty, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Subscribing to My Podcast. Because I have a new guest featured every week, it makes it very difficult to maintain consistent viewership. So if there's one thing that you can do to support me or the guest featured on the show, it's by interacting with my channel in every way that you can. You can always decide to unsubscribe later if you decide that you hate me or my show. With that plugging aside, enjoy my discussion with astronaut Clayton Anderson is a retired NASA astronaut who has cataloged 167 days in space, which is crazy. And now he teaches here at Iowa State University in the aerospace department. He also writes books, he gives presentations and motivational speeches, and he really just wears a lot of hats or helmets in some cases. But Clay, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and then tell some of the viewers the important things that they should know about you.
I think you did a pretty good job, Elijah. I would tell you that I'm also currently the president and CEO of the Strategic Air Command and Aerospace Museum in my hometown of Ashland, Nebraska, which is halfway between Omaha and Lincoln at exit 426 on Interstate 80. So come see me and bring friends, bring wallets, bring millionaires, all of which are needed when you run a museum. I am a resident now of Ashland, Nebraska. My wife and I relocated to Nebraska 2.5 years ago, and now we live in Ashland. I'm a new grandfather, and that's about it. The rest of it's pretty boring.
Yeah, all the other stuff is pretty boring. I think your story to working with NASA is super interesting, and it's pretty unconventional. But I guess just if you can let the listeners put on their favorite music and turn the fireplace on, and you want to just tell the story from start to beginning on just how you ended up becoming an astronaut. Like, what did that journey look like for you?
A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. So it's kind of it can be a long story. I'll try to shorten it a little bit, but I was a 9-year-old kid in Nebraska in 1968 in front of a black and white TV on Christmas Eve. And my brother and sister were awakened by Mom and Dad to put us there because they wanted us to witness the Apollo 8 crew going behind the moon for the first time in human history. As we sat there on Christmas Eve, right, we had to wipe the sleep out of our eyes. But as I looked at that black and white TV, and the cameras back in those days were simply two big black and white cameras focused on mission control, which was full of men, right? That's all it was guys back then. Ladies, we fixed that since then, so everything's cool. But the head of the room was called the flight director, and the flight director controlled the activities for all the people in the room and then the Apollo 8 crew that was out in space. And so the flight director at that time, he kind of gives this, I need to go, no, go for translunar injection burn. Retro, go! JPO, go! Fido, go! Surgeon, go! Right? Capcom, go! Everybody was go, right? And then he reaches out to the Apollo 8 crew, and I'm thinking, do they really have a choice? And they say, yeah, we're go too, but we're already out here, you know. So they make the burn. They go on to go about the moon for the first time. And as they get to the moon and go behind that rock in the sky, it cuts off all the radio contact. So for a 9-year-old kid watching a black and white TV in the middle of the night, I'm hearing and nothing else. And I'm thinking, oh, my gosh. A volcano on the backside of the earth erupted and blew them out of the sky. Yeah. And then in today's world, right, I tell kids that, and maybe a Harry Potter dragon flew in and across him and burned him to a cinder, and they're all dispersed in outer space. So I wasn't quite sure what was going on. But eventually, after several minutes, because it was for a long time, but then the Capcom, who is the astronaut that speaks to the crew, he reaches out and he says, Apollo 8, Houston, over. And he calls them again, Apollo 8, Houston, over. And I'm thinking, this is not good, right? When are they going to talk to these guys again? And finally, you hear the Quindar tone, beep, and the crew from Apollo 8 says, Houston, Apollo 8. Yes, Virginia, there really is a Santa Claus. So on Christmas Eve, they had made it around the backside of the moon for the first time in human history, and I was witnessing this on a black and white TV, and I'm thinking, oh man, I want to be one of those guys. So that's the short story, and then of course there's a lot of time that transpires between that day and me actually becoming an astronaut, but a lot of happenstance, a lot of good luck, a lot of fortuitous events would put me at NASA at the Johnson Space Center, and then it took a lot more luck and a lot more fortuitous events to put me in the astronaut corps. So I'm very blessed with all of that. Who'd have thought that a small town kid from Ashland, Nebraska would one day become the first and currently the only astronaut from Ashland or from Nebraska, and also the only astronaut from Iowa State University.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of a similar experience that a lot of people who are really interested in space or who end up becoming astronauts have. But for people who don't have that intuitive curiosity or they're not as interested in space, it's hard to understand what it is that would drive you to explore these things or why it's important that we even explore space. So what, I guess, continued to motivate you to pursue this as you grew older, as you discovered how jobs work, as you became an adult, and then you started to make these decisions? What motivated you to continue pursuing wanting to be an astronaut?
I just thought it was cool. But you're right. As you learn and grow and understand the working world, and that you need to have, back then I needed to have a degree in order to achieve any of this. And once I got that degree, I decided to get a master's degree, which is what brought me to Iowa State in the first place. So those two things coupled together with 2 summer internships in Houston at the Johnson Space Center. The first, which came after my senior year of college at Hastings. And I went down to the Johnson Space Center and worked for 3 months. And it was okay. The job was really boring. I met a lot of cool people. I saw the Houston Oilers and the Houston Astros play in the same building, but not on the same night. I was able to learn a little bit about NASA and Johnson Space Center and about the astronaut corps. So I remember sitting in this big room where my desk was with about 7 other desks and a secretary. And that's what we called them back then. They weren't administrative assistants, they were secretaries. Well, the lady sat way across the room at her desk and did her thing. And it was kind of pre-computers, and you had typewriters and all that good stuff. And then I sat in this room, which turns out was the crew quarters office space for astronauts getting ready to fly on the shuttle. So in order to separate the crew from anyone that might be sick, they had this room that I was sitting in that had all these desks where they would come and work their daily stuff while they were training before they went into to fly. So as I sat in this big room over a 2.5-month period, I was bored out of my brain. They gave me stuff to do that wasn't very challenging for me, and I would hand it back to them, and they'd say, "You're done already?" Yeah. You finished it all? Yeah, it wasn't that tough. And then they'd go, "Okay, thanks." And then they had no idea what to give me next. So I ended up taking my differential equations book from college, and I worked differential equations problems at my desk at the Johnson Space Center for fun, actually to keep me awake, right? Because it was crazy because I would sit in that desk with those other 6 empty desks, and astronauts would walk by. Right, they had to go through me to get to another part of the building, and so they would come in, and I'd say, "That's an astronaut. Oh my God, that's an astronaut." But I wouldn't say anything because I was too afraid to. Right, so it was a very interesting summer. The first time, my second internship, I was awarded after my first year of graduate school at Iowa State. And this one, I had a little more, right? As you said, I was learning about the job world, right? So I said, "Hey, I don't want to work at the place I was last year. They were great guys, but I'd like to work in some place that deals with trajectory development." Because I had taken a class from Laverne Seversike here at Iowa State University, a great professor, rest in peace. And he had kind of turned me on to trajectory analysis for spacecraft. And so NASA obliged me and put me in this group called the Mission Planning and Analysis Division. What a great summer that was. I mean, they actually had people that let me do stuff. They had stuff ready for me to do. They coached me and counseled me and helped me do it correctly. It would become the basis for my master's degree thesis. The development of a technique to separate a deployed passive payload from the space shuttle orbiter. That was the title of my thesis. I still remember. I still have a copy in my office at Iowa State. But all that happened such that those guys, that group, wanted me to quit graduate school. I had a year to go. They wanted me to quit school and take a full-time position in Houston and then go to school at night to finish my degree. And that was because they were a government entity that could only hire when the government said you can hire. They were worried that window would close, but I was worried that my window would close and I wouldn't want to go to school at night, right? So I turned them down and I stayed at Iowa State and I finished my degree. And fortunately for me, I think in April of 83, they reached out to me and said, hey, the window's still open. We want to offer you that job. And so I had a full-time job at the Johnson Space Center coming out of graduate school at Iowa State. And, I went to Houston in 82 and basically never left. And so 42 years later, my wife and I find ourselves back in the state of Nebraska where it all began in Ashland. So kind of a fortuitous cycle there.
Yeah, well, and I guess the interesting part too is, and you kind of revealed this a little bit in your journey, in that you just opened up a DiffyQ book and you're reading it for fun.
Boy, isn't that sad? That's really sad.
That keeps a lot of people awake at night unconsensually, let alone.
And I probably didn't do any of the problems correctly. The fact that I could even remember to open them up and start to work on some of them was pretty impressive to me. But don't ask me to do that today. I would have no idea. Yeah, I still have the book, but.
Well, yeah, now you're interacting with all the college students who are doing that now, and they never want to open it again in their lives.
Exactly. I don't tell them that part, though.
Yeah, but I guess the interesting part about that is that's not very intuitive for a lot of people. To me, there's some sort of motivation that exists within you that motivated you to open that book and read it, or to even pursue going into space in general. To me, there's some sort of secret sauce that exists with you that doesn't with maybe a lot of listeners who aren't familiar with, who aren't curious or who aren't interested in discovering things or who don't like problem solving or some of these things. You don't have that academic mindset or something like that. Now, is there anything you can point to within yourself that motivated you to pursue space or motivated you to continue doing these things other than maybe just a job? Was there some sense of discovery, in the Star Trek opening, or was there some sense of moral purpose or duty?
No.
Or is it what kind of continued to motivate you?
It was more that I didn't like boredom, and I was afraid to be caught at my desk sleeping. And my boss at that time was a guy named Wayne Williams, and Wayne was a great guy. He was classic NASA, right? He wore the button-down shirt and the skinny black tie and the gray slacks almost every day at work. And he would come in at 7:30 right on the dot, and he'd sit at his desk and he'd start shuffling through papers and stuff. And then, bless his heart, about, 8 o'clock in the morning, I'd look at his desk and he'd be slumped down in his chair snoozing, right, with his hands interlocked across his chest. And, bless his heart, I understood that, right? As you learn more about the working world, there are certain things that you want to do to keep you engaged and motivated and challenged. And I wasn't challenged by those guys. It's just the way it was. I've found, though, in my career that oftentimes people that host interns aren't ready for the intern, right? They perhaps haven't had one before. Their team hasn't dealt with somebody who is aggressively capable. And so they're not prepared to give them enough work to keep them gnawing on the bone, if you will. So for me, that was an eye-opening experience, but I couldn't keep my eyes open all the time. So that's why I was working differential equations. Mm-hmm. Because I could read, there were books, I could read technical manuals, but those things will zap you to sleep in a heartbeat too. Mm-hmm. Which is funny because when I got my full-time job at NASA in the Mission Planning and Analysis Division, the guys that I worked with that previous summer took me right under their wing again and started to give me work to do. And there were a couple other new guys, right, that had come in. They became dear friends of mine, but they were even newer than I was, right? And they were assigned to their desk, and they were given a stack of NASA internal notes. And it was so funny because they didn't ever make me read those. They made these guys sit down, and that was their first job, was to take a highlighter pen and start reading and highlighting and learning. Well, I was learning too, but I was learning by doing. And I'm a learn by doing guy. I'm not a learn by reading. You can't sit and lecture to me and get me to understand it. You've got to give me the salient points, and then you have to let me go, turn me loose, and let me do it. And it will come out just fine. But I chuckle when I think back to those guys, those huge stacks of books on their desk, and they must have gone through 10 highlighter pens, just, and I'd walk by and smile at them. What are you doing, Clay? What are you doing? Well, we're going to go run a simulation over here on blah, 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 blah. And they just, what? But eventually, they got past that part in their training too. So I was pretty lucky. The guys that worked with me, one of them would become my kid's godparent, and he's still a friend in Houston. And they were monumentally important to my success. They didn't look at me as a problem that they had to solve or a dog they had to train, right? They just took me under their wing as another engineer, and they mentored me and taught me and let me grow, and that was really cool.
Yeah, and I think that makes sense to me as I'm trying to understand your story and what kept you going. I do know that an interesting facet of your journey into NASA is that you kind of did the application process. And didn't you apply 14 times?
I did.
Or something along those lines?
I was rejected 14 times.
Which to me, can you just kind of walk me through that? After application 5, why why did you keep going?
Yeah.
And you eventually got it, which is a testimony to perseverance. But I guess walk me through that application process, what you did very well, what ended up getting you in, and then maybe what was holding you back the first times.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think me doing it 14 times is either because of perseverance or stupidity. I think what I get a lot of kids that come in my office at Iowa State when I'm here and ask questions like these because they're interested in becoming an astronaut. For me, I tell them that applying to be an astronaut is easy, becoming an astronaut is difficult. So the very first application for me was very hard. I had to gather a lot of information. You have to think back to, where were your last 3 jobs, blah, 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 who are your resources, all these things. And we had to do it with a typewriter and whiteout because it was a government SF-171 form or something that you had to fill out. Now, you still have to fill out the form, but you do it on the computer, so you don't need whiteout anymore. You can read it over 100 times before you print it out or submit it, so you don't have to worry about that. But here I was sitting, reading through an application that had no room to type anything. It was looking for words, not sentences, not paragraphs. And that was a difficult thing, right? I had no idea what I should write down. I got an Iowa State master's degree in aerospace engineering. My thesis was titled this. I got a degree in physics from Hastings College. My grade point averages were this, and this. My 3 references were within my circle. But, it was a pastor at my church in Ashland, Nebraska. It was one of my teachers at Hastings. And it was, I don't even remember who the third one was. But none of that was going to get me in against a bunch of PhD military jet jockey, fighter pilot, helicopter driving, stud muffins. And so my odds were pretty low. So in year 5, what was I thinking? Well, probably ought to fill this out again. Yeah. Won't be quite so hard this time. Haven't done much since that first year, but I did get scuba certified. Let me put that in there. And as you grow in an environment at NASA Johnson Space Center, there are a lot of people that want to be astronauts. That's where they live. That's where they worked and trained. So you could run into one all over the place. And that inspiration or that knowledge that I actually got to work with some of them in the group I was an engineer in, which was really cool because you could be on a first name basis with a real astronaut. Well, that's kind of neat, but it didn't help me get in the Corps. It would take my career and building my career path just by doing the right thing, doing the best job I possibly could with whatever job they gave me, trying to grow into new roles and new positions, trying to be a leader, being a follower when I needed to be not being afraid to speak up when I heard something that didn't make sense. I guess those are the traits that would lift me up toward that path. But I think the most important thing I did career-wise to becoming an astronaut was I agreed 2 years before I was selected in 1998, back in 1996, a job came out. And the group I was working in, Mission Operations Directorate, that was where I lived, they came out with this job and they sent an email and said, hey, is anybody interested in being the director of the Emergency Operations Center at the Johnson Space Center? And I'd been doing my job for a long time, and it was getting to be where I was going to be a paper pusher more than a worker. And so I looked at this and I said, yeah, I might be interested, and I hit send. I go home and I tell my wife, hey, I put my name in for the job possibility, and we talked about it over the weekend, and we both decided, nah, I probably won't take it. Well, on Monday morning, I got an email that said, congratulations, you're the new director of the Emergency Operations Center.
Wow.
What? Apparently, I was the only person that responded positively. And my wife and I were thinking, well, what are we going to do? Well, I can say, no, I'm not going to take it. No, you better, let's go ahead. So it turned out to be the best move I ever made in my life. I loved that job. It was 2 years of learning. It was 2 years of motivation and challenges. It was 2 years of leading a new group of people. And I was learning about multiple facets of the Space Center that I'd never thought about before. So as that guy, I was in charge of terrorist threats, bomb threats, hurricane damage, medical emergencies, fire emergencies, and security. So police force, all that stuff. That was under my purview. But the coolest thing about the job was it was brand new. There had never existed a position like this at the Johnson Space Center. It was run, all those things I just mentioned were run by individuals. One guy was responsible for fire. One guy was responsible for security. One guy was responsible for medical emergencies, right? And here comes this Clayton Anderson guy who, coming from mission operations where we plan, train, and fly, I was going to bring that philosophy to these entities that were working kind of independently. I blew their mind. Most of them were pissed, right? Who is this clown? Who's this guy, right? And so I had to win them over. And that was part of the fun of the job. That was part of the challenge, right? What do I have as a leader that can convince them that this is win-win for all of us? And that was so much fun. And when I convinced them, hey, it's plan, train, fly, baby. And when I got them on my side and we started to do actual simulations, the very first simulation we ever did was we had a child at the daycare center kidnapped. That was the scenario. And I brought out a TV guy with a camera and a reporter, and I freaked them all out, right?
Wow.
So, I mean, there are people running around JSC talking to security about the kid that was kidnapped from the daycare, and oh my God, it blew the whole place up. But it showed that we were not ready to handle the emergencies. And as we did that one, then we did other ones. We got where we were doing an emergency once a month, a scenario, a simulation, which is exactly what we did in mission operations. And we got better, and we got better, and we got better. And it was awesome to watch. It was awesome to see the confidence grow in all these organizations. It was awesome to see the communication increased and enhanced between all these organizations and figuring out how they can do it the right way. And, JSC had their own 911 line. So if you had an emergency, you dialed 5 3s on the phone. And you got these guys up in this building, bless their hearts, and they'd answer the phone, what's your emergency? And then if you told them, they had to read through these paragraphs and sentences of a book that they'd been given. Well, by that time, all that was automated in electronic software, right? And so we purchased for them the software where they could do flowcharts, and all they had to do is say, Elijah, what's your location? You'd say building 30, and they'd hit the button and building 30 would pop up, and then they go, it would tell them what questions to ask, and it would lead them quickly through a diagnosis of what needed to happen. And just to watch these guys' confidence grow, it was amazing. It was a great job. And people watched at the Johnson Space Center. So when I walk in my 15th year to do my interview that year, people around the table that used to not know who I was, they knew who that guy was now.
Well, yeah, because you were burning the place down.
Yeah, exactly.
From their end, all they could hear is
that's right.
This new Clay guy shows up, and now people are getting kidnapped. Things are burning.
Yeah. And hurricane hit yesterday, and there's bodies everywhere. But I think it was a testament to I was setting an example of of something they could compare to. Would this guy make a good astronaut? And I think the work I was doing as the Emergency Operations Center director was paramount to them being able to say yes.
Right. And so I guess for people who are starting to apply to be an astronaut at NASA and they look at you and they see the 14 years of applications,
Yeah, well,
they're going to go through. I guess if you were to prescribe to them an intentional thing to do, what would you maybe for these people who are looking to apply, like what advice would you give them for applying?
live long and prosper.
Yeah.
It's funny. I just talked to a young man today in aerospace about this very same subject, and the advice I give kids, young people all the time today is the same. Carry two imaginary buckets, one in your left and one in your right hand. And in the left hand is the I hate this bucket. And in the right hand is I'm okay, I like this bucket. So as you go through life, you're looking at those buckets constantly, and you're putting, calculus, I hate it. And you put chocolate sundaes, I like it. And you put them in the buckets. But you also have to be willing to realize that sometimes the buckets will transfer. If you hate calculus in your freshman year at Iowa State, but then you take it a second time like I did, advanced calculus, and I had a better professor, I didn't hate it as much anymore. I actually liked it. And so things can transfer between the two buckets. Now, as you go through life, you're constantly looking at those buckets. I want you to focus on the one that has your likes in it, because that's the bucket that will help you define your career path and where it might take you. And I wish I had had that advice when I was a kid. But if you do it that way, becoming an astronaut's your second career. You have to have a first career, and you have to be really successful at the first career to even have a shot at being an astronaut in your second career. And if you do something you love and you're good at and you go attack it every day, you're going to be better than most. And if you're better than most, you have a shot at becoming an astronaut. There's no guarantee, but you have a chance. And so that's what's important. That would be my one piece of advice is there's no recipe to becoming an astronaut. Oh, you got to get your pilot's license. You got to scuba dive. You got to, climb a mountain. You got to jump out of an airplane. You got to, be a part of MIT. You got to go to Caltech. None of that. I mean, it all works. It's helpful, but none of it's required. And so you have to define your path. And the best way to define your path, I think, is with those two buckets and to follow your likes.
Wow, and that's really insightful, and it's really interesting too, because I think a lot of people, when they're thinking about doing something as big as becoming an astronaut, they think they're just going to have to put their head down and do every single thing that they hate, and then then they will have unlocked the ability to be an astronaut. So it's like, once I get my PhD in aerospace, even though I don't really like it that much, then at least, and I can go through all these trainings, and I go to the military, even though I don't really want to do that, all these things, and then you can become an astronaut. But you're kind of saying that it would be more beneficial to just pursue the things that you appreciate and allow those to challenge you and to be good at those, and then that'll look good enough to become an astronaut.
It may look good enough.
Okay.
But the other piece of this is with no formula in place, and the odds are terribly against you. Maybe there's, I don't know what the number is today, maybe 580 astronauts in the world today, and the world's got billions of people on it. So the odds are really low that any individual, including me, would ever be picked to be an astronaut. And that number is going up by all these people that are castronauts, right? That can pay billions of dollars to fly into space for 5 minutes and say, "Hey, I'm an astronaut!" Yeah,
yes,
right.
Yes.
I mean, the world is changing, and to be a part of that 580 people selected out of 3 bazillion humans on Earth, I'm very proud of that. But how did I get there? I don't know. There are tons of people that would have been better astronauts than me. Ask Johnson Space Center. They'll probably tell you. But you have to be realistic in the pursuit of your goals. There was Hastings College had a sales slogan several years ago. They said to pursue your passion. And that's a cool slogan, but your passion won't get you everywhere. If you're passionate to become the next winner of The Voice on TV and you can't carry a tune in a bucket, that passion will get you nowhere, right? It has to be realistically applied. You have to be willing to do the things that are necessary to become an astronaut, but gosh, I would hope you'd like them, right? Oh, I got to climb Mount Everest. Oh, God. Oh. Which I would never do. I'm glad that's not a requirement.
Right.
But I got my pilot's license. My wife and I got scuba certified. I didn't ever jump out of an airplane until a couple years ago. And so I did some things because I always wanted to do those things. I wanted to be scuba certified. I wanted to go look for sharks and stuff. I wanted to fly a small airplane. I didn't realize how expensive it was going to be until I was actually doing it. But those are not requirements, but they are delineators. And the other piece of advice I gave the youngster today was, as you look at your buckets and you pursue that first career before you pursue the astronaut career, you also have to live life. I had a guy come to me in Houston one day and have a discussion like this, and he says, I think I should get married. Really? To become an astronaut? You think you should get married? Well, that's a life plan. That's not an astronaut plan, right? If you have a girlfriend or a fiance and you love her and you want to spend the rest of your life with her and make a family with her, or your significant other, go do it. That's your life. Live your life, because you have to be happy in your life and happy in that career to have a shot at being an astronaut. And an honest story, my wife and I, we would lay in bed after I'd been selected as an astronaut and I'd initiated training. And there were a lot of frustrations in that first couple years. And my wife she turned to me one night and she said, do you hear yourself? This is something you've wanted to do your entire life. And now all you're doing is bitching and moaning about how difficult it is. Oh, you're right. And that changed my perspective, right? Yeah, there were difficulties, and yeah, I was moaning and bitching and whining, but I was doing what I had dreamed to do my entire life. And everything's going to have bumps in the road. Everything's going to have hiccups. And you have to be able to overcome those and deal with those. I worried a lot, was I studying hard enough? Because I'd see these astronauts carrying around these little books that they'd made, these little gouge books with all their highlighted notes and stuff. And I don't have one of those. Should I have one of those? Where'd you get that? Oh, I made it. You made that up? You put that all together? Uh-huh, yeah, I did. Oh, God.
I'm losing.
Yeah, maybe I'm not, but it would turn out that in our first year, we had to take exams. We were the first or second class of astronauts that they made start to take exams. They had some trouble with the people in the 96 class, and there were some issues. And so when the 98 class came in, they had changed the training program such that you're going to learn these lessons, and then you're going to take an exam. And then we're going to move on to the next set of lessons, and you'll take more exams, right? So I'm in the first exam, and we're being videotaped because they're worried that we would cheat, that astronauts would cheat.
Never.
No. And so I'm sitting there, and they hand out the test, and I look at it, and I start answering questions, and I zip through it, and about 5 minutes go by, and I'm done. Well, wait a minute. 5 minutes? There's like 50 questions on this damn thing. So I went back, and I looked at every question again. Another 5 minutes I go through. I didn't change the thing. I look at it, 10 minutes in, I look around the room, and there's people rubbing their foreheads and tapping their pencils, and they got their chin in their hand, and they're, just looking like they're all studious. And I go, I'm done. And so I turned it in. I get up and I walk out of the room. After 10 minutes, I'm the only one that left. And now I'm thinking, uh-oh, I messed this up big time. Turns out I didn't miss a question. And at that moment, that's the time I knew I belong here. I can do this. I belong. And once I had that, it was Katie bar the door after that.
Well, and this is very inspiring and interesting to me, because you exemplify this really well, because one of the monikers that you use in a lot of your medias is the ordinary spaceman.
Right.
And what you're trying to say is that, or what I presume you're trying to say is that, like, even somebody who doesn't follow the direct path or has met certain kind of challenges can still become a spaceman, can still become an astronaut despite all these challenges. I guess my instinct, and to challenge you on this a little bit, is that, like, and I don't know if a lot of people should have that comfortability, maybe taking that test like you did, or if they're going to have the experience that you did, or maybe some of these people who are looking at their path forward and they're looking at what it's going to take to be an astronaut, and they're like, I don't know if I'm going to enjoy any of this, or I don't know if I should.
Right.
And so I guess like what advice or qualms can you give for the people that are looking at their future and they're trying to predict how much am I actually going to enjoy this? And or those moments that are hard and difficult where you were like bitching with your wife about, you know, what you're doing. When they're complaining about these things, what advice do you have to get them over that, to like figure out how to enjoy it, how to enjoy the process when like the process for a lot of people is supposed to suck, when, you know, for others maybe like you it doesn't. How do you get people over that hump?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would remind them of their two buckets, right? And that if you follow your like path, you're more than likely going to be on a path that you enjoy. And any of those paths will still have those hiccups. So when you get to the hiccup part, it's nice to have a wife or a spouse or a significant other that you can chat with it about, right? And because maybe they'll have sound advice like, shut up and just get on with it. And, or, provide you with ways to deal with it. Well, hey, Clay, everything's hard. You know, think about where you've come. Think about how far you've gone in this quest to become an astronaut and fly in space. You're overcoming obstacles all the time, and maybe that's part of the plan. Maybe that's what they want you to go through, is a lot of stress and a lot of crazy stuff, because they need to figure out if you can do this, if you can be a crew member, if you can be a teammate and a team leader, if you can execute under the possibility of death staring you in the face. What do you do? How do you behave? How do you get past all this? And what they would do throughout the training before I ever got assigned to fly, it was a lot of that. It was to pressure you, to stress you, to put you in places you'd never been. I lived underwater for 2 weeks. I did several sets of survival training, including two times, actually three times of winter survival. That really sucks. But if you get through that, you show yourself, hey, I can do this stuff, and your confidence builds. At least mine did. You have to have that mindset that is big picture, right? Look at the big picture. I want to go to space one day, and I want to do a spacewalk. So in order to do those things, I'm going to have to get over some minutia that maybe isn't pleasant or maybe isn't fun. I ate a rabbit's eye in Brunswick, Maine during survival training because I was trying to impress all my classmates that, hey, anybody want to eat this rabbit's eye? Oh, Clay will do it. Yeah. Right? Because you had all these fighter pilots saying, I already did this, man. We did SEER training. Yeah, this is a piece of cake. We're out here for 3 days, like a holiday vacation. and I ate a rabbit's eyeball. Would I ever done that ever again or ever? Probably not. But there's lots of competition, and you look for ways to stand out. Some people look for ways of standing out by degrading or pushing back on other people, right, to push themselves up into the spotlight. I tried not to do that ever. I just kept my head down and kept coloring, which is some good astronaut advice. Keep your head down and keep coloring.
Yeah, well, and I think when you're doing the applications and then you finally got that job, a few years before you had been, your application had been successful. Do you think that if you hadn't gotten that job, things might have looked different for you? Or do you think that maybe eventually you still would have become an astronaut?
I probably would have been disappointed, right? You just never know. And I figured the odds are pretty against me to becoming an astronaut. And where I was in my life at the time, I was married. We had young kids. My job was good. I looked like I had a career future at the Johnson Space Center. They had placed me in a program called the Executive Development Program. So somebody thought I had what it took to be a big dog at the Johnson Space Center. And that got derailed when I became an astronaut. So I was in a pretty good place, even if I wouldn't have been selected. And as my wife likes to tell people, the day we got the call, she says, she has this twinkle in her eye, and she says, our lives changed. And they did. And once they changed that way, it's really hard to go back. It's just, I've been truly blessed.
Yeah. And so you get this call, and you've accepted, and you worked so hard to get where you are. once you're doing it, how did you kind of like stay thankful, stay kind of humbled, stay kind of in the mindset of being thankful at the beginning, and then especially once you're going out on your first mission and stuff like that? Like, what kind of things were keeping you grounded, keeping you thankful, keeping you challenged, stuff like that? Like, how did you stay in that mindset?
It was relatively easy for me in that I was raised in a small town in Nebraska, and the teachers and my family and my church family that raised me and helped me grow, humility was important. Trying to, I was a guy that when we were in PE class, for example, we used to have to select sides, right? The PE teacher would come out and say, okay, Elijah, you're captain of team A, Clay, you're captain of team B. Well, what sport are we going to play? I don't know yet. Or did you just pick your teams, right? And I always tried to pick the guys nobody else would pick. Did I want to win? Sure. I was competitive as heck, but I was wanting to win with them, because if I won with them, it made them feel really good, right? And I just loved feeding off of their excitement and their successes. It was just fun for me. So I kind of always had that mindset. And you want to be the person that convinces everybody that it's a win-win, you want them to think it came from their idea. Those are good skills to have, and they're not bad things. It's just you're manipulating people a little bit, but you're manipulating them for an end goal. And I think in the world of NASA and mission success, those are the kind of things you have to have. You have a lot of smart people working there with a lot of smart ideas, but somehow you have to filter down the ideas that are possible, monetarily possible, technically possible, and schedule possible. And sometimes people get hung up on an idea that's very sophisticated and very flamboyant, perhaps, but it's not part of the good, better, best philosophy, right? Good, better, best, pick any two. You want it good and better, it ain't going to be best. You want it better and best, it ain't going to be good. The way it works that way is important. So somehow in my career and my upbringing, I had those qualities that allowed me to look at myself and say, look, you're pretty blessed, dude, to be doing this. So you got to stay within the guardrails and just do your job, and remember who got you there. Remember who helped you, because you're never doing it by yourself.
Yeah, and I think that's probably super important when you spend your whole life working towards a goal and dreaming of something, and then you finally get it. It can be hard to kind of ground yourself and be like, okay, I remember where I was like 6 years ago, looking at the future version of me who's here right now. Let's just sit in that and enjoy that. And that's really helpful too. Some of that advice I think is very applicable to making sure that people are staying in this mindset. I imagine that, and I heard you kind of tell this story, and I want you to tell maybe some of the viewers here this story as well. But that first time when you are in you're in space for the first time, and you're about to just enter into space. This is your first spacewalk.
Yep.
And you had talked about icicles and some of that, but I think it's easier for people to imagine how exciting or maybe stressful the actual blast off might be, or like sitting in there, they can feel that. But I don't know if there's any movie that has ever encapsulated what I imagine the feeling would be like to just to be out there, like now I'm in space. And so I want you to kind of describe this and maybe like talk about the first time that you experienced this.
So it was July of 2007. We were going to go out on July 23rd. And I have to back up a little bit, because about a week, maybe a week and a half before, my spacewalking partner was Fyodor Yurchikhin, a Russian cosmonaut. And Fyodor and Oleg Kotov, the other Russian cosmonaut, they had done a couple spacewalks in the month of April and May, maybe. They had done 2 spacewalks in Russian suits. And so they had never done spacewalks before, and nor had I. So during that week and a half before our first U.S. spacewalk, Fyodor would float down to me in the lab module, and he'd say, Clay, spacewalk soon, go slow, be careful. And I'd look at him and I'd go, Fyodor, that's really good advice. Thank you. I will remember that. And he'd float off, and he'd come back a few days later and he'd say, Clay, spacewalk close, go slow, be careful. And I said, got it, Fyodor, got it, memorized it, all good. It'll be fine. He float away. So the week or the couple days before the spacewalk, he comes in and he does it again to me. And you know, I'm trying not to smirk or anything because I've heard it now 3 or 4 times. Clay, go slow, be careful. And then we get to the day of the spacewalk, right? And we've slept in the airlock for pre-breathe and all the equipment's ready to go. We're getting suited up and I find myself in the airlock in my spacesuit and my head is right above the hatch, the opening hatch that's going to let us out into the vacuum of space. Fyodor's feet are by my head because you have to go in opposite to be able to fit. And so I'm the lead. I am the boss. I am EV1, they call it, and I've never done a spacewalk in my entire life. And Fyodor, thinking he's pretty hot snuff now because he's got 2 spacewalks and I've got 0, he's, you know, go slow. So I get the call from the ground and we're depressurizing the airlock, right? We're taking the pressure inside the airlock down to 0 because we're going to open the hatch to the vacuum of space, which is already at 0. And as we're doing that, things are going well, and I get the call to Clay, it's time to open the hatch. And so I'm floating there in my suit, and I crank the handle on the hatch, which is at the base of the airlock, looking toward Earth, actually. And I pull that up, and then I push it back against the wall, and it locks into place. There's a little catch that locks. And now I'm looking at total black. The darkest dark I'd ever seen, right? You can say your shirt's black, Elijah, right? But it's not that. It's more than that. It's the total absence of light. And as I look out there, and it's about a 3-foot hole, and as I look through there, icicles are shooting from the back left of my spacesuit into that vacuum of space and blackness and disappearing. And it's the coolest thing. It's like snowflakes just going out and then disappearing. And all that ice is coming off of my sublimator, which is my air conditioning. So my suit's trying to allow me to keep warm and cold at the same time, keep the right temperature. So heat is being released and the water's being frozen and it's going out in these icicles. And I'm holding on to the hatch with just my right hand. And I've used about 3 fingers, my thumb and my index and my middle finger. And all I could do floating there, all I could think of was I was born to be here right now doing this. And that's a true statement. And it was just amazing to me. I thought of nothing else. I didn't think about Fyodor. I didn't think about my wife and kids. All I thought about was I was supposed to be there doing that.
And it's hard to even imagine like what it would be like to see the nothingness, you know, or to see Earth and to feel kind of that weight behind you. I mean, like, even when you're outside of the ship and you're floating around, you're working on stuff, you can feel against your back the space, you know what I mean? I imagine that there's just like, if you let go, you could feel yourself floating back, you know, you could feel the urge to just jump. Like, what was that like to be out there, like floating around and you can just feel the lack of things surrounding you? To me, that just seems insane.
It's a pretty big place, obviously. And when we got outside, I was hanging with my feet toward the earth, actually not hanging, but floating. And Fyodor was passing me things out, equipment that was coming out. And it was still dark. It was going to be dark for a while because the sun was behind the earth. And Fyodor kept trying to hand me this tether. And the Russian word for tether is fall. Kley, fall, нужно fall, need the tether. No, don't need it, no fall. Nie нужно. And he kept handing it to me. And we didn't need it, but for some reason he thought we did. So I finally took it from him and I called the ground and said, hey, I'm taking this tether. I'm going to put it in this bag. I don't think we need it, but we'll keep it safe. Because anytime you take something out into the environment of space, now you've exposed it to vacuum and temperature extremes, right? So now you're losing lifetime on that piece of equipment. So the fact that we're taking out something we didn't really need wasn't probably the smartest thing to do, but we did. So Fyodor comes out, and I'm working on tethers, getting everything buckled up so that we're safe. And the next thing I know, I look around, he's gone. And I rotate 360, and I'm holding on to the circular handrail in the airlock, and I don't see Fyodor anywhere. And so I'm summoning up my best Russian. I said, Fyodor, остановить сейчас, stop now. Нам нужно делать вместе. We're supposed to do this together. Okay. And here he comes crawling back. Man, he had just like blasted off, and he'd gone off to do his first task, where you're supposed to use the buddy method. And here he comes crawling back. And we got together and we got on the same page. And then we went off and we had a 7-hour and 41-minute spacewalk. One rookie and then one guy with two, right? Yeah. 7 hours and 41 minutes, and we didn't make one single mistake. And I was hugely proud of that. And the fact that I was in space on the front of the space station for one of the tasks I was doing, speaking of how big the volume of space is, we had turned the space station entirely around to fly backwards. And so I'm on the front of the space station flying backwards, and I'm messing with some tools because I'm going to get on the end of the robotic arm as a cherry picker so I can throw away 2 big pieces of equipment. And I take a second. For some reason, I look up, and here comes the moon. And it rises quickly from behind the Earth, and it just like, oh, my God. Oh, it was the coolest thing I'd ever seen. Well, it hadn't been out very long, and I was going to see a lot more cool stuff, but that was pretty cool. And it rises really quickly because you're traveling in orbit, and you don't have to wait like you do on Earth. But it was breathtaking. And here I was. That was the first time I realized, oh my gosh, do you realize where you are?
Yeah.
You're in a spacesuit hanging on the back or the front of the space station, which is flying backwards 240 miles above the planet Earth. And I looked down and it was, oh. But then, you have to be good at saying, okay, that was cool. Back to work. Because you have 7 hours and 41 minutes of stuff to do.
Yeah. That's just wild. I know that there's some interesting psychological effects that can happen once you go out into space and you see Earth for the first time, and it has some sort of like existentialist effect.
It's
on
round.
Yourself. Yeah.
It's not flat.
I was gonna bring that up later. I'm very interested in your thoughts on that. But some of these psychological effects that you see the Earth, and it makes you. It kind of internalizes who you are, where you live in the world, like what it means to exist as a human. And you have a lot of these effects, or maybe when you see the moon, some of these things happen too. And also the compounding effects of being in space with one Russian dude for months, or however long it's supposed to be. I guess, what are your experiences with some of these psychological effects, maybe on you, or maybe some of the people you've talked to, maybe astronauts who have done more or less than you? I guess talk to me about some of these psychological effects of being out in space.
Yeah, the hardest thing for me was being away from my wife and kids. Cole was 10 and Sutton was 6 at the time that I launched the first time. And I was going to be in space for 5 months and maybe longer, and I had no idea if I was ever coming home. And so that was the biggest psychological hurdle for me. I didn't really think in the beginning of my 5-month mission, I didn't think about the length of it, right? I was just in the moment, trying to do the right thing and learn as much as I could, as quickly as I could, understanding that I had months to go. It's very much like being in a football game where the first quarter's very exciting, right? Everybody's just kicked off. You've done all this practice, and you start the game, and it's the crowd's into it. But then the second quarter, things calm down a little bit, and you get more steady state, and you get into a rhythm. Then you take a break at halftime, and all bets are off, and you come out in the third quarter, and that can be kind of chaotic if you're not quite ready to strap it back on and get after it again. And then finally you have the excitement and the suspense and drama of the fourth quarter. So my space flight was broken up pretty much that way. I was very blessed with how the tasks were spread out. My launch was in June. My first spacewalk was July. We had a visiting crew in August. Then in September, I was going to fly the robotic arm and move a module from one point on the space station to another. And then came October. Also in August, I had a couple more spacewalks. Then I flew the robotic arm in September. And then in October, it was winding down, so I had to pack up everything and get ready to go home. So it was very much like that football game, right, where you went through the highs and lows. But the most psychologically stressful part for me was not being with my wife. Now, the nice thing was I had a telephone. I could call her every day and talk to her if I needed to. There are a couple stories that occurred during my time in space that were pretty tough for me. I called her one day early in my mission, and she was crying at her desk. And, when we went through what was going on, what the ground and the astronaut office was distressing her about. That was pretty tough and pretty psychologically debilitating. Being the only guy from Nebraska, there were a lot of people that were proud of me, and that included Senator Chuck Hagel, who called me the day before I launched and wished me well. And I got up to space, and I told my wife, I said, I should call Hagel again, and I should call the governor, and I should call the other senators and congresspeople from Nebraska and tell them how proud I am to be up here. And she said, well, I can help you do that. I'll talk to the protocol officer at the Johnson Space Center and get their information. Well, when she went to do that, boy, that upset the apple cart, and she was called into the astronaut office, and what the hell is Clay trying to do? Is he running for office from up there? And no, he just wants to tell his state how proud he is to represent him. And he goes, well, there's got to be something else going on. And they had my wife crying, and I was in a tin can and wasn't going to be able to see her for months. That was a tough time, and I went into a bit of a funk. If you read books, you hear about the Skylab astronauts that kind of got into it with the ground. Well, I was there. I was right there in that moment, and I quit talking to the ground. I answered in one-word answers, no, yes, and then that's all I would do. I thought I could take it. I thought I could get through it on my own, but I couldn't. I would go into my sleep station and cry. I would bang my hand against the wall and say, what the hell are they doing? And I finally decided to write an email to the entire mission control team and say, it was called Warts and All. And it's in my book, The Ordinary Spaceman, and it talks about, hey, you get me the way you get me. You get the guy, warts and all, and I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to do things that are wrong or say things that are inappropriate, but you have to understand that I'm doing the best that I possibly can, and I'm not wishing ill will on anybody. And my wife and I were able to get through that and push through to the rest of the mission with minimal issues. There were some others, but most of it was minimal. So the psychology of spaceflight is one thing we haven't covered very well at NASA. I wrote an article or a chapter for a book NASA published, and they asked me to write about the psychological aspects of it. Well, I did, and we're not there yet, right? If you think of 6 to 9 months traveling to Mars, to live there for 6 to 9 before you come home in 6 to 9, that's a long time. And if you put humans on board in a confined space, there will be stress, there will be sexual urges and that sort of thing. Do you need alcohol? Do you need some kind of drugs to take the edge off, which is what we all have access to here on Earth? Those are questions that need to be answered. And it'll be interesting to see how it all unfolds, because all the astronauts say, I'll go to Mars, I'll go. But, what happens after that, we'll see.
Yeah, and that's wildly interesting. I guess I wasn't even thinking about like the disconnect between, or the disconnect. It's weird because you get to communicate with people on the surface, but you don't get to interact with the people on the surface. And it's like this, like you can see them, but you can't really do anything about it. You're just kind of there to absorb. And I didn't even think about that. I guess, one of the effects I was interested in is, I think they call it the worldview effect or something like that.
The overview effect.
The overview effect, yeah, where the perspective on who you are and what your place in the world is changes when you look at that. Did that happen to you, or did that happen to some of the people that you interacted with? Or
I think it happens to all astronauts. It's called the orbital perspective, or the space overview, mission overview. And it happened to me, and I get it, right? I see the Earth. I see our spaceship Earth. I see that we're all crewmates and crew members on the same spaceship that's traveling through outer space, and that we should all love each other and work together just like a crew would on a space shuttle or space station. I totally understand all that, and I totally agree with it. But where my philosophy changes a little bit is there's lots of hatred and envy and jealousy in the world. Between countries, between peoples, it's everywhere. And until you solve that problem, you're not going to be able to have the USS Federation of Planets like we had in Star Trek. That it's going to be a tough road to hoe. However, space can be a useful entity to get to that point. by partnering with other countries like Russia and the European countries and Japan and Canada. We partner with them in space. I think we should partner with China in space and India and all the other countries because that will be a step toward the road of a united federation of countries. And we can't do the future by ourselves. It's too expensive. But I think for me personally, the thing that living and working in space for the 167 days I was privileged to be there, all it did was strengthen my faith in God. As I would look out the window and as I would think about where I was, I would tell myself, none of this is random. There's order to all of it. And I witnessed it every single day. From that moonrise when I was on my spacewalk to the fact that every single thing that launched toward the space station during my time in space was exactly on time, every time, to looking at the Earth and seeing the rivers begin in the mountains and travel through the plains and dump into the Gulf and the oceans, and to see icebergs near Antarctica and all the things that I got to witness and be a part of. I think there's a higher power that brings order to all of this. There may be astronauts that disagree, but this is Clay's perspective. And my orbital perspective, my orbital overview is that, we do need to take care of Earth. We do need to work together to solve the problems that it brings. But there's no randomness to any of this. It's all ordered.
Yeah, and that's incredible. And I think, and you might have a different perspective on this, but I wonder, it seems like that's a shame that is a perspective that you only get when you're in space, when you see it, and if there were a way to maybe communicate that or imbue that feeling into people without having to spend so much money to launch them up into space to do that, that might be extremely beneficial. And I don't know if your perspective on that is different, if you know of a way to kind of communicate that to people without,
Well, by doing podcasts like this and me speaking and telling those stories is important. And it's important to me. How people take it, that's up to them. But I'm a firm believer that if we could send every human being up for 5 or 6 days in outer space and then send them to a third world country to live for a month, that the perspective that humans bring to the table would change greatly. Now, you're right. How are we going to do that? That's expensive. Well, Elon and those guys are working on doing it in the commercial spaceflight world, and Bezos is taking people up for 5 minutes at a time. And you hear the rave reviews that William Shatner and Michael Strahan and all those Emily Calandrelli and those kind of people are bringing back to Earth. And that's just 5 minutes. Imagine if they could spend 5 or 6 days there. So it will always be a question of cost and technology. And that's what people have to realize. We have people today on Earth that can't afford to get on an airplane and fly anywhere. And it's the same. We're at that point in spaceflight where we're at the very beginning of what's capable, what's possible. And until we get to a point where nearly all or most of the population of the Earth can afford to travel into space, space is not for everyone. It's still for a wealthy few. And I think we'll get there. It may take a while, but we want to get to the point where we're not Orville and Wilbur at Kitty Hawk. We're 777s that people can scrape enough money to buy to get over to Abu Dhabi and have a bit of a vacation. I think that's very possible. I just don't know the time frame. But again, 5 days in space and a month in a third world country would change a lot of attitudes.
Yeah, and that's really interesting too. I think there's a time aspect, there's a money aspect, but I also think maybe recently there is a motivation or a purpose aspect that I kind of want you to touch a little bit on. I guess one of the most important questions is, why is it important that we go to space? Like, why should we even do that? That maybe some people are skeptical of, like why we should even be spending money to do that. And then I guess other than maybe this perspective change, why should people go to, like, why should we be spending money on space exploration and doing stuff like that?
And that's an easy question for me to answer, I think, Elijah. Yes, we need to have people see the orbital perspective. We need to let them have that ability to see the beauty of the Earth, and it kind of cements in your brain that, hey, we're all in this together. But the other piece for me is, it doesn't matter what the destination is. It matters what we learn along the way. And so if we go to Mars, or we go to the moon, or we go to an asteroid, or we go to Andromeda, or wherever the heck we go, we're going to need to develop technology along the way. We're also going to have to develop our brains further along the way. And God gave us that brain that's a developing organ. And, you know, you think back to Cro-Magnon man who just went around bopping things with a big club and good, right? And trying to survive. To us today and the problems that we have already solved, but we're facing some new ones, some big ones that we need to deal with. But that's what happens when you develop your brain and you develop technology, and that's what the challenge of these space endeavors put in front of us. And it's not just space, right? It's underwater endeavors. All these endeavors we're trying to do. Elon boring holes to create tunnels for traffic in California. Every time we do something crazy and amazing like this, we're learning, we're developing new tech that will come back to benefit every single human being on the planet. And isn't that why we do it? That's why I think we do it. And yeah, some people do it to make big money and some people do it, you know, for other reasons. But by and large, we want to benefit every human on the planet. We want to make life better for all here. I don't agree with Stephen Hawking, who said we should abandon Earth and go to Mars and populate Mars. Really? Are you kidding? Did you watch The Martian? God. I would rather work together with humans to make this planet sustainable because it's the only one we know of in our solar system, in our Milky Way galaxy, and currently in the universe that has a human species that can accomplish what we can. If you look at the universe as a massive pizza, we're on one crust over here on the right side. All we've done is go to the moon and back, 238,000 miles with humans successfully. That's it, pretty much. Sent some probes out. Good for us. But what if there's another species on the exact opposite side of that pizza doing exactly what we're doing? How do we get to the point where those two species meet at the pepperoni in the middle of this massive pizza? Well, it takes money. It takes technology and brain development to be able to figure out and solve the problems that will allow us to get there. So that's my diatribe on and philosophy on what's going on out there.
Yeah, and I wholeheartedly agree with you. I think
Woohoo!
one of the yeah, thankfully
I didn't pay him for that,
yeah,
audience.
yeah. But yeah, I think one of the important aspects of that too is I think there's one other aspect that I think might be important, and I'm interested in how you feel about this because this is my most uneducated area, is I guess where do you see the likelihood that we're able to do these things? Like, do you see in 100 years us being able to, like, I guess what does the future look like for space travel? Does it seem like it's even possible for us to meet another civilization, even in 1,000 years or in 100 years? Like, I guess you're in the world right now learning about these things. What does the future look like for space travel?
I think just because I haven't seen it doesn't mean it doesn't exist, right? I've not seen God, but that doesn't tell me he doesn't exist. I haven't seen an alien, an extraterrestrial, but that doesn't mean one doesn't exist. Time is an interesting part of this. The human civilization has made some amazing accomplishments just in the last 200 years. If you kind of assume that maybe we're going to continue to figure stuff out at a pace like that, you know, the next 200 is going to be pretty darn exciting. My grandmother almost lived to be 100 years old. She saw the first airplane flight. She saw the first car. She saw the first shuttle. I mean, holy cow. And that was in one lifetime. And so I'm betting on the human race. I'm betting on those people that are way smarter than me that are going to help us get together and figure out these problems. And problems are better figured out, I think, with, I tell my Iowa State freshman students that I love the fact that in my classroom I have females, I have international students, I have local farm kids, right? If you put diversity on teams like that, you get better perspectives. They see things differently, and that leads to better solutions. And that's another aspect of this idea that's important in doing it as a global civilization versus as a United States civilization. Yeah, the money is going to be tough. But the problem solving is also going to be difficult, and you're going to need perspectives that show a different way, right? I tell the kids, and we're going to talk about this tomorrow in class actually, but if we tell the kids that we take 4 pig farmers from Iowa and we give them a problem to solve, they'll probably solve it, but their answer might be a lot different if we just took 1 pig farmer and 2 kids from international countries and then a city kid on a team to solve the same problem. They might get a total different solution. Both solutions could be equally effective. They may not cost the same, or maybe they do, but that's the excitement I think that this brings to the table.
Yeah, and I think that there's just a lot of really cool positive energy towards space travel, especially right now. And I think that, and this might be a little controversial, but I think that some of the recent stuff that especially like Elon Musk has done in terms of space flight is not commended enough. I mean, it is just like, it's really crazy that somebody is doing the stuff that they're doing for the sake of space, you know. And I just think that maybe that gets bogged down a little bit by maybe some of the political natures of the other things that they might be involved in. And I just think that space research and the innovations that we've been making recently with space is so interesting and commendable. And I don't know if you have anything to say about just like what you've seen, the progression in your lifetime of how space. I mean, you even saw the first time they went around the moon, and now you're doing your own stuff, and now you're seeing people just tour space, you know? So I guess like, do you have any interesting perspectives on maybe some of the more modern research or things that have been done in terms of space, and then how you've seen that change throughout the last couple years?
Direct all the listeners to spinoff.nasa.gov. That's a great place to go look and see. You'll be amazed at the things that have come to people through space technology, like the phones that we have sitting on our desk here right now have more computer in them than the shuttles did. I used to talk about the lunar moon boots led to the Air Jordan tennis shoe. The Soles did. Pig farmers in Iowa, an artificial sow was developed that allowed extra teats for all the sows, the piglets that were being born that wouldn't survive normally because the sow didn't have enough. But we could create a way to create artificial teats for these piglets, things like that. The ability for satellite imagery of crops to tell you that in your 4,000 acre plot or whatever it is, 400 acre plot, you have 1 acre that's dying. Well, in the old days, they probably would have to cut out the whole 400 acres, but now with satellite imagery, they can isolate to the bad single acre and take care of that. Well, that's a huge savings for people, right? So all this tech can come back, and these are old examples, very much old examples. You can look at a kid now with invisible braces. That has roots in NASA technology. The center pivot irrigation system has roots in NASA technology. So all sorts of things. That's one place where I think investment of tax dollars has been utilized for the most part well. Maybe not totally, but for the most part, we do a pretty good job with the taxpayer dollar.
Yeah, and I think that's a really awesome and positive perspective to round this episode out, because we've been going on for a little bit over an hour. But I wanted to give you the final opportunity to kind of wrap us out and close this episode out. If you have any messages that you found were thematic throughout the episode that you want to hit on, or something that you said that you want to talk about, or if there's any advertising for maybe some of the awesome books that you've written, or some of the websites that you want people to visit, really this is your opportunity to close us out and say anything that you would like to say for people who have made it this far.
Anything. Well, my website is astroclay.com. You can purchase my books there. You can purchase memorabilia, merchandise there if you want. There's some cool stuff on there, some cool videos for teachers, educators. I'd also send you to the SAC Museum, sacmuseum.org website. That's the place that I'm the president of now, which we're doing some cool things there and trying to make it an STEM education and innovation center in the Midwest. But I guess I would close just by saying that one of my goals is to be the voice of the Midwest. Ashland was a small town. It still is a small town. 1,800 people when I grew up there. And I need to show, and through the museum, through my website, through my speeches, through everything I do, my goal is to show that I can let kids see what's possible. We need to get kids out of their current environment to see what's possible, because if they don't know they can be an airline pilot, or they don't know they can be a brain surgeon, or they don't know they can be an astronaut, we need to show them, because when they figure out what floats their boat, what their hot button is, and we can touch that hot button, we're going to create better citizens for the United States of America and therefore the world. So every kid is just like me. Every kid is the ordinary spaceman. It just takes a little bit of hard work, a little bit of luck, and you can do some amazing things. So thanks for having me on the program today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, Clay, you were awesome. This was wildly interesting to me. So.
Well, good. I hope it's wildly interesting to all the people that listen.
Yeah, me too. All right.